Welcome to everyone who is signed on. Welcome to Holy Shift, Strategic Thinking for Congregations. My name is Miguel Escobar, and I serve as the Senior Program Director for Leadership Resources here at the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy weeks and busy schedules to attend tonight's event. As you can see in the chat box on the lower right-hand side of the screen, we have folks from all around the country and all around the Episcopal Church joining us. And if you haven't already, we're asking that you write in the chat box where you're joining us from tonight. Just a little bit of technical information. I want to point out that if you are having trouble hearing me, please call the number which is on the lower left-hand side of the screen. That's 1-855-742-3074. That will, you'll be able to hear the entire conference through the phone, which is sometimes a stronger connection. If you'd like to turn on your webcam, you can do so by pressing the Start My Webcam button, which is on the toolbar. And then lastly, I want to note that because of audio interference, occasionally we have to mute everyone so that we can hear the presenter more clearly. So if you get a message saying that you've been muted, just know that that's because of audio interference and it's not personal in any sort of way. Before we begin, I'd like to just say a few words about the Episcopal Church Foundation and what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. The Episcopal Church Foundation, or ECF, is an independent, lay-led organization whose mission is to build the leadership and financial capability of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other institutions in the Church. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to check out our website at episcopalfoundation.org and our publication especially aimed at congregational leaders, which is ECF Vital Practices at ECFVP, as in vestry papers, or vitalpractices.org. We provide a variety of financial services. We help congregations do capital campaigns, start planned giving programs, and more. We're launching a new initiative called Vital Teams. We have a fellowship partners program. But one of the most important things that we do is what we're doing this evening. We offer on-site and online workshops on the leadership and financial challenges facing Episcopalians today. So again, welcome to tonight's event. And tonight's presenter is Donald Romanick, and there's a little bit about his bio, but I'll let Donald introduce himself.
Thank you, Miguel. And you'll see that my name is not ECF Leadership Resources. And the person who has actually Donald Romanick too is Brendan Hunter, who is our Associate Program Director for Leadership Resources. We had a little technical difficulty earlier on, so I'm sitting in a different space than I usually do. But thank you and welcome. I have the honor and privilege of being president of the Episcopal Church Foundation, and I've been in this position for 9 years. And what I've come to fully embrace and believe is that the process of visioning and planning and strategic conversations is critical for every organization. It was critical for ECF when I started this job 9 years ago. And it's critical for every congregation and faith community. So I'm doing this webinar based on a strong conviction that the process of strategic thinking is necessary for our local faith communities to thrive and become vital, vibrant congregations. And that's been kind of my focus here at ECF and what I've kind of preach and teach throughout the church. So I'm a lawyer by training, a lawyer in recovery, as I often say, but I am really privileged to be in this position where I meet lay and clergy leaders throughout the church and learn a lot about them and learn from them as I hope they learn from all of us. So welcome and thank you. So let us pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity. And in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen.
Amen. This is Miguel again. I'm going to give just a brief overview of the upcoming presentation. It's a presentation in 6 parts. We're going to begin by looking at one congregation story, one Christ Church in Pensacola, Florida. As I said, we're going to break it apart a little bit and look at their process for thinking strategically about the future. We're then going to look at the difference between mission and vision and how congregations can articulate both of those 2 elements for their future. We're then going to look at strategic thinking versus strategic planning. I think where many of us are familiar with strategic planning processes, this is a little bit more about real-time, ongoing thinking processes about challenges and opportunities that congregations face. We're going to look at goals and strategies for meeting goals and how congregations can evaluate strategies for meeting goals. Then we're going to look at the resources that are available for congregations who are doing strategic thinking, and then have about 15 minutes, hopefully, of discussion on practical next steps. So with that, Donald.
Thank you, Miguel. We're just going to focus on one congregation who engaged in a thoughtful, prayerful planning and visioning process, and that was the subject of Linda Buskirk's article, which I know many of you read, Christ Church, Pensacola, Florida. Christ Church, Pensacola is located in downtown Pensacola, and they really felt that they needed to kind of step back and look at who they were, what God was calling them to do, and how they can come up with kind of practical ways of moving forward. Ironically, they started this process kind of right at the tail end of the recession, so they really felt that a planning and discernment process was critical. The first thing they did was identify their ministry strengths. And this is something every congregation, every faith community needs to do and should do. And you always start with, what do we have that's working, or what do we have that's unique, or what do we have that is really an asset to the community? And that was an important part of their process. And from there, they went to a vision statement. And their vision statement was really, what kind of impact did Christ Church Pensacola hope to have on the immediate community and the wider community based on what they felt were their ministry strengths at the moment. And they came up with a vision statement that they were a diverse and faithful community in which the openness of Christ Church to welcome and engage all people in a faith journey will continue to grow. And from that, they developed specific goals based on that vision. And the goals were kind of, not dissimilar to what a lot of congregations discern. They wanted to develop more robust marketing to determine the best use of recent property acquisitions. They had recently expanded their physical plant, And they really wanted to step back and say, okay, now that we have these new properties, how can this best serve the community? They also felt that given their location and given their ministry strengths, they really wanted to reach out to youth and young families. And because they were still reeling from the 2008 downturn and recession, they really did not want to kind of jump into spending a lot of money, especially refurbishing their new buildings or their newly acquired buildings without a thoughtful process. So they really felt that the goal setting was an important part of the process. Then they developed values, or what we call strategic criteria, for how they would evaluate how they would achieve their goals. And in addition to their ministry strengths, they also looked at other aspects of their congregational life or their situation, which they felt they could kind of capitalize and use to move forward with their ministry. And that included their present location, the fact that they had a school and a food bank, and they basically looked at other strategic criteria that they would use for implementing their goals. We'll move on. We'll move on in some of these issues as we go forward, but we're going to continue to go back to Christ Church as just one example of how this process actually works. I know when Miguel asked the question, it seems that people seem to understand the difference between mission and vision, but often people talk about mission statements and vision statements, and they're often used interchangeably. And I think for purposes of this discussion, it's important to know kind of how we at ECF define these. Mission describes kind of what God is calling you to do at the moment, and basically what you do. And most missions are in the form of a statement, but it's often, even an often informal description of what you do is important and necessary. For example, at St. George's, we are called to welcome everyone, gather weekly for worship, serve the poor and the least of those in our midst, and use our time, talents, and treasure in service to God's kingdom. You know, mission is what you're currently doing, and it needs to be kind of an accurate statement of what you're actually doing. Vision, on the other hand, do we have a next slide? Thank you for the water, Miguel. Vision is a hopeful picture of what the future would look like if you accomplish your mission. So it is an aspirational type of statement, but as we'll mention in a moment, an important statement. So when you look at Christ Church's vision, their vision is that if they faithfully live into their ongoing mission of being a worshiping community, a school community, a resource to the wider community in downtown Pensacola, they feel that they will be, their openness to Christ, being a diverse and faithful community, they will continue to engage people in the faith journey on an ongoing basis. Often, for example, if your mission is to engage members of your congregation in worship and Christian formation and outreach, the vision of that would be that you would have a group of faithful disciples who are making a difference in the lives of their community and the world. So mission is what you're doing, what you feel called to do. Vision is what the world or the community will look like if you actually live into your mission. Next slide, please. So the issue is, how does your vision guide strategic thinking? And we're going to talk about strategic thinking versus strategic planning. But you see the quote from John Cotter from Leading Change, because it basically directs and aligns your actions for the future. Vision statements or visioning exercises are not just aspirational goals, because you need a vision in order to come up with specific goals, specific strategies for moving forward and rallying the community around a common purpose. So back to Christ Church, because of the economic downturn, the goals became a guiding force. Rather than being kind of overwhelmed by the economic realities, the goals and the strategies clearly directed the vestry and the leadership on how they would move forward. The vestry reviewed the goals on a regular basis and developed strategies on a regular basis. And as the rector described, the goals were a gift of hope to us. They helped us focus in the midst of keeping above water. Often what happens, especially during economic downturns, or if you're currently experiencing some infrastructure issues or financial issues or issues of membership or attendance, having a vision, goals, and strategies help keep you focused on the big picture and moving forward rather than getting overly mired in some of the challenges. And this is the whole thing about turning challenges into opportunities. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. This is kind of the crux of what we're trying to talk about today. In the old days, you'd have a strategic plan. And generally, you would engage in a planning process for 6 to 18 months. And then you came up with a master strategic plan that you hope would kind of take 3 to 5 years, sometimes even 10 years to implement. So you went through this process of planning and then in this process of implementing. The problem with a traditional strategic planning process, at least one that is based on a planning period and an implementing period, in this day and age, it's almost outdated the moment it's complete. And that's why often strategic plans are, they're a great process, but they often sit on the shelf because they do not reflect the reality of what we call real-time planning and implementation. In today's world, rather than a period of planning and then implementing, you're planning, implementing on an ongoing basis. So what is the problem with traditional strategic plans? Because often they generate more goals than can be reasonably pursued. Often a typical strategic plan for an Episcopal parish is that we will double our membership in the next 3 to 5 years. We will grow our endowment from $2.50 to $1 million. We will increase our stewardship by 100%, and we will attract 100 new young families a year. And while these are all, noble goals, what happens is that if you're engaged in kind of a strategic planning process that is also kind of a dreaming process, you tend to put too many goals or goals that are basically too broad or too ambitious to be achieved. The other thing is that traditional strategic planning processes mistake strategies for goals, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You try to fit goals into rigid timelines, that within the next 3 to 5 years we will double the number of members of the congregation, when it's really unrealistic to try to take goals and strategies and fit them into artificial timelines. And in this day and age, a 3 to 5 year time frame for forecasting is pretty unrealistic, especially given the pace of technology, the changes and chances of society and the church. The idea of trying to come up with a plan that spans that time frame is really unrealistic. So one of the questions we raise is a 3 to 5 year plan still the way to go? At ECF, we do not have a strategic plan. We have what we call a strategy roadmap, and I'll talk a little more about that, which is an overall blueprint that talks about who we are, where we've been, where we feel God is calling us to do, and some broad strategies, including kind of a big question on what we feel we need to focus on. And then each year we come up with specific measurable goals and strategies for implementing them, and we go back and tweak them on an annual basis to see whether we're on target and whether or not we're having the impact we want to have. Next slide, please. So we talked about kind of the downsides of strategic planning, and instead what we're recommending you all kind of try is real-time strategic thinking. You know, I believe it was Eisenhower who said, planning is essential, but plans are useless. The idea is the process of ongoing strategic thinking is something critical to every congregation, every faith community. First of all, it's iterative and ongoing. It's an ongoing process, and in fact, I would recommend that at every vestry meeting, you take some chunk of time, in addition to routine business, where you engage in strategic thinking about a particular issue that goes beyond kind of the day-to-day business of the parish. It is an opportunity to identify goals that are aligned with the long-term vision. If your long-term vision is to be kind of a beacon of hope in the community where people are engaged in God's mission in the world, it's really helpful to have an ongoing strategic thinking process that really says, well, how are we actually going to do that? What are we going to do today? What are we going to do tomorrow? What resources do we need? Do we have what we need? Or do we actually need to kind of tweak our approach to moving forward? It identifies strategies for reaching the goals. Often people will articulate a goal, but they won't necessarily articulate a strategy for achieving that goal. You know, the kind of simple definition of a strategy is basically a ministry, a program, an idea, an action step for achieving your goal. It also is an opportunity to evaluate both your long-term and short-term strategies in light of your mission, your financial capability, your uniqueness, your ministry assets. It's a way of basically determining whether or not you're doing what you say you do. It's having an impact in the areas you want to impact, which may be your congregation, your neighborhood, the wider community. And you're actually moving toward this vision of where you feel God is calling you as a congregation or faith community.
So this a chance, I'm noticing that in the chat box it's relatively quiet, but this is a chance to share your questions, concerns about what we're laying out or points of clarification. We also have a few discussion questions written on the slide, which we hope might provoke a comment or two. So I think that for many folks the microphones are working. It's also possible to send a question in the chat box. So any questions?
Does the whole idea of strategic thinking make sense to you all? And can you see how you might be able to apply that process in your own congregational setting?
Okay, we have a few folks.
I know a couple people typing. Let's stop to see what people might say. Yes. And strategic thinking or strategic conversations, they don't necessarily have to be kind of huge big picture issues, but they have to go beyond kind of the day-to-day stuff. For example, a strategic thinking type of conversation you may have at a vestry meeting is the demographics of the neighborhood are changing. How can we continue to serve our current members while responding to the needs of the immediate neighborhood, given our resources, given our physical plant, given our ministry assets? Now, you're not necessarily going to address that in one vestry meeting, but it starts the leadership thinking beyond kind of the immediate issues at hand. It helps you think about, okay, what are our ministry assets? It may be that we're the perfect location for the neighborhood to meet. We have a very active food pantry. We are well connected with the neighborhood leadership. These are the kinds of conversations you have that starts translating into specific goals and then into specific strategies. Yeah, there's some good stuff coming up on the chat box. The hope aspect. Yeah, the problem with strategic plans is that sometimes kind of because you want to get it done or there's pressure to get it done, it becomes a task rather than a process of engaging all the members of the congregation. The idea that one of the advantages of strategic thinking is that you can change course in the middle. So, for example, I gave you that example of, how can we continue to be, respond to the changing needs of the neighborhood? Then all of a sudden something happens that totally shifts the discussion. So, for example, let's say your wonderful building burns down, or you have a major influx, you have a major bequest of $300,000 that you did not anticipate, or your major donor or your major pledger moves or passes away. So now the strategic discussion conversation is around, given the fact that we no longer have a physical plant, can we still be a vital asset to the neighborhood? Or do we need a building to do ministry in this place? But you do it in the context of your own reality, but as the chat box suggestion, you do it from what are our ministry strengths and what do we feel we're called to do? Okay, do you have recommendations for helping a parish update, revise, or gain focus to an existing vision? Vision statements are there to serve and support and inspire the congregation. The congregation is not there to be a slave to the vision statement. And if your mission and vision statements are not working for you, start from scratch. And they don't have to be, brilliantly crafted poetry that you necessarily want to inscribe on the wall. Your mission conversation may be, we are a faith community that worships, gathers for fellowship and Christian formation and tries to make a difference in our community. And your vision may be that by doing this prayerfully, thoughtfully, and deliberately, we will engage in God's mission in our neighborhood and the world. But that's why the process needs to be ongoing and iterative. The problem with perfectly crafted mission and vision statements is that you're almost afraid to revisit it. I mean, who wants to revisit the Declaration of Independence because it's so beautifully done? But if the Declaration of Independence was a statement saying, we're tired of being under Britain's control and we want to do this on our own, and you had an ongoing strategic conversation on how you do that, that might be a whole different process. I know I'm being sort of glib there, but people get kind of stuck in the muck of vision and mission statements rather than the process of engaging in lively, prayerful, thoughtful conversations on an ongoing basis.
Donald, we have two questions about how to engage other parts of the congregation other than just the vestry in this sort of visioning congregation. Ann Taylor asked, how do you, is this possibly a church-wide conversation? And Laura had a very similar question.
Well, first of all, one of the things you may do at the vestry level is frame the question. What do you think would be a good question, a good strategic conversation starter to bring to the wider congregation? And it may be something like, what do we think are the elements of a vital, vibrant congregation, and how do we feel we're meeting them or not meeting them at the time? Or maybe, how can we better empower the members of our congregation to share their faith stories with other members of the congregation so that we get to know each other in a deeper, more spiritual way? Or maybe, it may be as simple as that, but I think if the vestry, in partnership with the rector as the missional and strategic leaders of the congregation, help frame the question, then they are exercising their leadership role in getting the process going, and then going back to the congregation, getting the input, and then going back and say, oh, we got a lot of good stuff. We have 5 pages of newsprint. Now, how do we take this rich information and start converting it to specific goals and strategies for moving forward?
Great.
Let's go to the next section and then see whether that generates kind of a little more conversation. Goal, so what are the difference between goals and strategies? Goal is a specific and measurable statement with a desired result. And the goal should be aligned with an overall vision. And that's why it has to be an ongoing process. So if your mission and vision is changing because your circumstances are changing, then your goals have to change as well. So let's go back to the example of meeting the changing needs and demographics of the neighborhood. So the goal may be, we will, over the next 12 to 18 months, we will have significant conversations and interactions with the residents and leaders of the neighborhood. Now that's the goal. So what are the strategies to meet these goals? So the strategy may be, we will have again, making this up, we will have a Halloween party for the neighborhood children, where we'll get to meet families of the neighborhood in a non-threatening social way. We will call the head of the neighborhood association, the local councilman, and the local state representative for a meeting with the key leadership on what they perceive to be the neighborhood, the needs of the neighborhood. So strategies, specific strategies that you can measure at the end. At the end of the 18 months, it's going to be hard to determine whether or not you've had meaningful interactions with the neighborhood, but you could, if you have specific strategies, you can measure whether or not you had the Halloween party, whether you had a meeting with the neighborhood leaders, or other specific strategies. Because part of this process is to step back and say, okay, did we meet our goals? Did the strategies work? And if the Halloween party was a flop, you don't say, okay, well, we have to have another Halloween party next year, or we're going to have a Thanksgiving party or a Christmas party. You then may want to kind of go back to square one and say, okay, that strategy didn't work. Maybe we have to find better ways of engaging the neighborhood. And then that's why you get into kind of, medium to long-term goals. And when I'm talking about medium to long-term goals, a medium goal may be something in the next 3 to 6 months. A long-term goal may be, 12 months to 18 months. Again, I'm trying to discourage this 5-year type of deal. I was at a parish recently where they had 10-year strategic plan. 10-year strategic plan. I mean, I can't possibly think about how any faith community could possibly have a plan that goes that far out, unless they have a hint that the second coming is going to happen soon, and therefore they can reach the kingdom here much quicker. Evaluating proposed strategies. I kind of mentioned that. For example, if the goal is to increase funding for our ministries over the next 10 years, again, the 10 years is problematic, but over each year over the next 10 years. So the proposed strategy may be an annual fundraising event. Leverage the building for rental income. Start a little small business enterprise. Do a capital campaign. You can't have the strategies fall into the same problems that traditional strategic plans have. Strategies have to be measurable, they have to be responsive, and you have to be able to throw them out if that's not working. So if the idea of an annual fundraising event, let's say you're doing it now and you have this, you want to have an annual fundraiser in November, and you can't find the leadership for it. No one seems to be excited about it. The idea is falling on deaf ears. Then you change that strategy. And then it may be, okay, we try a new approach to the stewardship campaign this year. Or rather than a fundraising event, we have one-on-one meetings to find out what people are really passionate about and where they're willing to put their resources. The idea is that strategies implement goals, but they need to be ongoing and iterative.
And this is Miguel, and I just want to go back to we had a question a little bit earlier about moving from, some of the more abstract visioning and strategizing to action. I think one of the aspects of this model that's a little bit different here is that we're really saying, you articulate one vision, a few goals, and then spend the bulk of one's time in a planning process evaluating what are the best strategies by which to achieve those goals. In the prior slide, there's just a description of, that brainstorming process that happens every single time. And the question that we're going to ask and try to answer now is, what are the criteria by which we evaluate which is the best strategy in a brainstorming session?
Good question from Susan. Say more about iterative. I guess when I say iterative, I mean it's an ongoing dynamic process. It's not a static process. So, for example, back to, and as Miguel said, you have 3 goals, or maybe even 1 goal. Maybe your 1 goal is to stabilize our finances for 2015. Or your goal is, we're kind of stuck. We're complacent. And our goal is to try to convert our members into faithful disciples. So the goal is to move from membership to discipleship, and the strategies may be to begin every meeting with Bible study, to create 3 meaningful opportunities for Christian formation, to start 3 home groups, and then on a regular basis, if not a monthly basis, this gets to my point of iterative. You look at the goal, you say, the goal still makes sense, but do the strategies make sense? Part of it is you have to look, strategies need to be responsive to the goal, and if they're not working, you throw it out. It's much the same way if our goal, when we make a New Year's resolution, our goal is we want to eat better and exercise more. And okay, the strategy may be I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week and only eat raw broccoli for the next 6 months. And after day 1, I'm going to say, these strategies don't work. What can I do to tweak them? And with myself, and maybe those I love, the iterative process is, okay, I can't go to the gym 5 days a week, but maybe 3 days a week. And I can't eat broccoli. I still have to have my cheeseburgers. How do I build, some fiber or vegetables into my diet? It's that ongoing process. The other thing is, if you have a rigid strategic plan and you're not meeting your goals, or you're not engaging in the quote-unquote action steps, it's really discouraging to the leadership in the congregation to say, oh my goodness, we spent all this time planning, and look, it's 5 years later and we only have 3 new members. We're failures. The idea of this ongoing strategic thinking process is that not only it's hopeful and practical, it engages the entire congregation, and it's a much more positive experience for everybody because you're always retweaking the process. Strategy filter. So, this goes back to, is this a good strategy or a bad strategy? Do we keep it? Do we change it? Obviously, if it's not working, you change it. But for example, does it support our mission and vision? If your strategy is totally contrary to what you're trying to do, for example, if your overall mission and vision is to be a force in your changing urban neighborhood, and your strategy is to move the church to the suburbs, that's inconsistent. Is it unique, or you're duplicating other people's work? And this is where, what you're trying to do in that particular neighborhood, 5 other churches and 3 other social service organizations are already doing it. That may not be the strategy for engaging the neighborhood. It may be that you are the central location where people gather and you will be the gathering place. Is it financially sustainable? That's the other problem. Often congregations will come up with goals and objectives that are beyond their capacity. It has to be sustainable, replicable, as well as transformational. Is this consistent with our identity? If you are a parish in southern Florida that's in the middle of multiple kind of neighborhoods of retirees and snowbirds, and you say that, our goal is to be a beacon for young families with young children, perhaps that's not consistent with your identity, especially if your congregation, your neighborhood, and your whole reason for being is to serve the elderly, retired, snowbird population. Do we have the internal capacity to begin and sustain this initiative? Do you have leaders? Do you have resources? Do you have energy? Do you have enthusiasm? There's nothing worse than starting an initiative where you don't have any of those. And it may be that, the vestry comes up with something, you go to the congregation, and everyone gives it a big yawn. It may be important to some people and may be something that needs to be done, but unless there's passion, energy, leadership, and resources to support it, it's not going to happen, and you shouldn't make it happen. So the strategy filter. Is it consistent with mission and vision? Is it unique? The last thing you need is for your little congregation or your big congregation to duplicate what other people are doing. Is it sustainable? Does it fit our identity? And do we have internal capacity for doing it?
Okay, great. So
before we go on to the next steps, any questions or comments about a lot of stuff I've been talking about? This whole iterative process, the idea of strategic conversations, goals and strategies that can be tweaked as time goes on, or the whole idea of a strategy screen. Anybody? And I see a couple people are typing some questions. People could ask questions on their mics if they want as well. Miguel, why don't you then discuss some of these next steps, and as we get more questions, we can always go back.
Sure. These next steps, this one next step slide is hopefully a really short summary of the entire process that we've just laid out. We began by talking about connecting your vision to ministry strengths, having genuine conversations among leadership and the wider congregation about what is your congregation particularly good at, and how then is that linked to your vision for impact. We hopefully clarified a little bit what vision is. We noted that it's a hopeful picture of what the church or world will look like once the congregation has fulfilled its mission. Our colleague Linda Buskirk, who wrote the article, especially likes to talk about it in terms of imagined impact, both for the congregation and the wider community. And then we moved on to this question of goals and strategies and strategy filters. We noted that your goals need to be linked to vision, and suggest that a congregation in this kind of ongoing planning process just name a few goals and spend the bulk of time brainstorming strategies for how to achieve those goals. The strategy filter comes in whenever it's time to decide which of the brainstormed ideas is the one or two that your congregation wants to pursue. And that's literally a process of just gathering together as a leadership team and going through and saying and asking together, is this consistent with our mission? Is this unique, or are we duplicating something that's already happened, etc.? Go through each of those lines in the strategy filter.
And you raise a good question. And Linda Buskirk, we at ECF have a program called, we call it Strategic Solutions. And we call it Strategic Solutions because it's kind of a custom process of working with the congregation and helping them engage in this process. And it could be anything from saying, well, we have some resources on vital practices you may want to look at, to actually helping the congregation go through this process. And a lot depends on where you are in this whole idea of strategic conversations and what you hope to accomplish. What often an outside facilitator does, and what we feel we've done in this process, is just help people look at things a little differently. and kind of usually, I mean, we've done this at a diocesan level. We do this with organizations. We do this at parishes. But getting a group of people in like a day-long retreat to start thinking about things differently. And, you know, and sometimes it's leading them through a process. You know, and you know, the advantages of a neutral, objective person or facilitator or consultant is usually you can say, you know, you say that you're a warm, welcoming community, but that's not my experience. Or you say you're engaged in a neighborhood, but why do you have high fences with barbed wire around it? I mean, again, I'm being a little facetious or glib, but it's you know, sometimes an outside person could name the elephant in the room. Sometimes an outside person could get, you know, the more reticent or persnickety people to either talk or not talk. And sometimes it kind of just tees the congregation up for them then to have the tools they need to engage us on an ongoing basis. Good and bad vision statements. I guess a good vision statement or a good vision process is where you articulate where you hope to be, that's aspirational and inspirational, but not ridiculously unrealistic. So, you know, if your vision statement is to bring about the kingdom of God on earth, that might be a bad vision statement. Or if the vision statement is, you know, to continue to serve the needs of our current congregation, that's also a bad vision statement. The vision statement has to be sufficiently aspirational, but also achievable and something that you can actually articulate goals and strategies. So, you know, back to our friends in Pensacola, they talked about this whole idea of, you know, kind of the welcoming community, engaging people in God's mission. That you can come up with specific goals and specific strategies and measure how far you're there. And you may say, well, you know, we made some progress this year. You know, we have more people who are excited about this place, who are engaging beyond these walls, but let's come up with, you know, more refined or defined goals and specific strategies. Does that answer your question, Rob? Do you think the size of a congregation is an issue in this process? No. Obviously, kind of the scope and of the process is different on the size of the congregation. But if you're a congregation, you know, the meeting congregation is 69. Let's say you're a congregation of 69 and you have a vestry of 9 people. Yeah, you can have that conversation. You can engage in strategic conversations. If you're a small congregation of 15 people, in fact, if you're a small congregation of 15 people, this kind of conversation is critical because then you have to say, who are we? Why do we exist? What is God calling us to do? And if you decide who we are is just a group of 12 people who love each other and want to worship together, and what God is calling us to do is to provide, you know, time to be together and time to pastor each other, at that point you may say, well, then we really don't need this big building that we have to cool and heat and secure. Or, you know, we could go to another congregation down the street and still gather together as a group of people who love and support each other. So in some respects, if you're a smaller congregation, especially with limited resources, this conversation and this process really gets you to the heart of who you are, what God is calling you to do, what ministry assets you have, what resources you have, and really helps you in a thoughtful, planful, prayerful way, kind of get to the nitty-gritty about, you know, so what are you all about? Discernment is critical. And in this whole idea of, I mean, we often articulate it, what is God calling you to do? And in our tradition as Anglicans and Episcopalians, we really believe that discernment occurs in community. And the community may be, two people talking to each other and then bringing in a third. It may be at the vestry level or maybe at the full congregational level. The strength exercises is helpful because when you sit back and talk about that, you really realize, well, we have some strengths here. We have some really committed people. We have a long history. We have elders who can share their experiences with us. So discernment is critical. And discernment, I think, is critical in our own personal and spiritual lives, and especially in our faith community, especially if we're stuck. The way to get out of stuckedness is to discern and engage in this process. And I'm a firm believer in it because I know it worked for our own organization, where we were doing a lot of good things, but we really did not have a clear mission, a vision, goals, and strategies. And that's why we have this what we call strategy roadmap process, which is ongoing, iterative, inclusive. We do it at the board level. We do it at staff level. And we constantly look at everything we're doing to see, is it having the impact that we said we wanted to have? An evaluation. Sometimes the E word that we don't like to discuss in the Episcopal Church is not evangelism, it's evaluation. And that's part of this process. I know we're running out of time. The next slide talks about strategic solutions. And as I said, we're really excited about this program, and it could be anything from just directing you to existing resources to a conference call. Kate Addams is our special projects director, is in charge of the program. She is an incredible person to have a conversation with. So if you even want to just talk a little more about this, give her a call, and she'll be glad to talk to you.
Great. And that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. Just a few notes. If you would like to be in touch with ECF or any of our programs and services, here's our email and phone number. We also list the ECF website and the website of our publication. You will know in just a few minutes, you will receive in your email inbox a request for you to take a survey. ECF, we're constantly trying to improve our webinars, and we would love to hear from you about how we can improve, make this more practically helpful, as well as clear in our presentation. So please take a moment to fill out that webinar and let us know what you think, and also be in touch.
Don't be afraid to dream and vision, because that's what God wants us to do. So that's kind of that's my final message. Good luck in all your ministries. God bless. And thank you. Thank you for your time with us.
And one more thing, I'm sorry, Brendan just reminded me. On the left-hand side, if you notice the green arrow on the left-hand side, there are two downloads that we've made available for you, a resource sheet on strategic thinking, as well as the slides for this presentation. And the resource sheet contains a variety of articles as well as books, some of which we've mentioned tonight. Sorry about forgetting that.
Yes, the Roosevelt. Just in time.